They say in a domestic abusive relationship, the most dangerous time for the woman is when she decides to leave. Dolores McRae and Gary McRae met at a dance and were instantly smitten. They were both from rural farming backgrounds close to Ballantrae in Donegal. However, Gary was from a Protestant background and Dolores was a Catholic. Gary would complete his group set in 1979 and go on to be an apprentice mechanic, and this would be his career. The couple were married by 23, and Dolores actually converted to Protestantism as part of the Church of Ireland, and she would actually become very active up until our story takes place. They moved to Ballybulgin, which wasn't far from Ballantrae. However, Ballybulgin was very rural. It was essentially just like a laneway, and it was a 2-story house. There was a large garden, and then there was a lot of land behind. There was sheds and stuff like that, outhouses. The couple would go on to have 4 girls. In 1985, they had Sharon. In 1989, Laura came along. 1996 then, there was Tanya, and in 1998, Leona. So Dolores was described as very social. She was very popular. Most people who met her, got on with her very well. She actually worked part-time and stuff in different bars in Donegal. She also played darts, so she was a part of the darts team for Bay Bush Bar in Ballantrae. Gary, however, was the total opposite. He was very quiet. Some people would kind of say sullen. He did drink locally. Now, it is reported that he was basically a control freak. Everything had to be correct. When he came home from dinner, from work, dinner had to be ready. The clothes for the next day had to be laying out ready for him to inspect them, stuff like this. After everything happens, his older daughters would come out to say essentially that this is how, their life was. Basically even says that kind of, during the summer holidays when they'd be off schools, it would just be them and their mother at home. It would be brilliant. They'd go to the beach, they'd do all this fun stuff, and it was a relaxed environment. But that as kind of 5 o'clock or whatever it started creeping up and they knew their dad would be home, the atmosphere would completely change because they knew when he came home there would be no fun, there would be no relaxing. They had jobs like he had false teeth, and apparently he would get the daughters to clean them and stuff. And essentially that they all had to do cleaning. He was also very controlling of Dolores in the relationship, as in he was quite paranoid and obsessive about her. So he constantly thought she was cheating with other men. There was at one point where he was accusing her of cheating with her own cousin and stuff like this. So it was just bizarre and unreal even situations that he was accusing her of. Dolores was working in the country inn in Ballynakelly, and it was said that she would come to work with bruises on her, her face and body, and that essentially she would kind of say, oh, it's nothing, and insist, there's nothing to it, or it just got to the point people would be commenting on it, and she would just change the subject. Then one night, the couple, Gary and Dolores, actually went to a dance in the country inn, and whatever they were doing, they probably danced themselves, I'm sure. And then that, how things happen, especially she worked there, she would have known the regulars, all this. And another man asked her to dance, and Gary went mad. So I think she could have gone up to dance with him and stuff, and then Gary got so jealous, and he went up and he actually punched the man. On New Year's Eve 2002, as they got back home to the house, whatever had happened, we don't know what was said or done or whatever to set him off, but basically he got out of the car and went around to Dolores' side, and as she was getting out, he punched her, and then he just kept punching her, and then she fell. It was snowing, so she then fell into the snow. It's reported that the last 3 years leading up to what we're going to talk about was the worst. It just continued to get worse, and it is said that the incident at New Year's Eve could have been the catalyst for her deciding that she and her kids needed to get out. She was losing loads of weight and everything from the stress and the worry of the relationship. Now, there are different reports. One book says that there was no reports made to the Gardaí. I think there could actually be 2 sources I have that say that there was never any reports, which is a common thing for domestic violence relationships. However, other sources actually do say that the Gardaí were called out on numerous times to deal with the situation. So maybe that happened for whatever reason. Maybe the daughters rang, I don't know. And maybe then it was just that Dolores wouldn't press charges. Maybe that's kind of where the interpretation is going wrong. So after New Year's, Dolores started her plan. And in April 2003, she rented a little bungalow in Glasgow, which was essentially 2 miles from Ballantrae and 2 miles from Ballybulgin. So it was just this like little bungalow. And so she started slowly like moving her belongings there. Then one day when Gary was at work, when she knew he'd be like out for a long time, she essentially got the kids and they left. I don't really know what happened after this. There's no kind of correlation as to what actually happens right after. It's just like one of the books says, oh, when he came home, he was probably furious and stuff. However, so whether he actually knew where she was living, I'm not sure. But he started calling his daughters. So like at this point, his daughters are kind of like 17, 14, 7 and 5. So the older two daughters, he was really calling the older two, and out of them he was actually calling the 14-year-old Laura. So he'd be calling them all like several times a day, daily. And Laura would later say that he'd be saying to her like, oh, you know, if you move home with me, you'll have a better life. Started naming this guy who I think Dolores then goes on to become friends with, Willie Armstrong, and started saying like, well, if you stay there, Willie Armstrong is gonna be moved in and he's gonna be your new dad, and you know, all this stuff. And even worse, then he would tell his daughters like that their mother was a whore, you know, that she was, you know, basically riding everyone and all this. Like it went as far as saying like their mother was a walking disease. Would tell Laura that like the mother only wanted her there so that she would clean and that she would babysit the younger two girls and stuff like this. They did get joint custody, although Dolores did have like the main custody. Obviously, he probably seen them kind of like on weekends and stuff. However, by August, Laura had just had enough. Her dad had just kind of, you know, gone and gone and gone. So she eventually just gave in and she moved back in with her dad in the family home. She said it was fine for a few days, you know, everything was good. And then all of a sudden, he just went again on his little tirades and rants about the man being a whore and that she was with this person and that person and all this other stuff, that she was a terrible mother and stuff. At this point, Dolores is now working at the Bush Bar in Ballantrae. I actually believe she had 2 jobs, so I think she was kind of working in like a couple of nights in each bar. Willie Armstrong, as I said, the two of them became friends, and I think they went to the Galway races in the August. It was over the summer anyway. And Willie Armstrong would later say that like when they stayed in B&B, they stayed in separate rooms and stuff, that there was no, you know, there was nothing like that going on between them, that they were just friends or companions. In August then as well, Gary rang Dolores' mother, Kathleen McRae, and was basically saying to her like, you know, down the front, oh, like she's not a fit mother, this and that. And basically said if I had my way, I'd stab her and I'd kill her. At the end of August, Gary then approached a neighbour, George Hammond, and asked him for help to dismantle a caravan that was around the back of the house. And basically dismantled it and then he burned it. So the caravan was all burned, but then it was like, you know, the chassis, I'll put up a picture, was remaining. Then in September, he asked for help cutting all the bushes, you know, that had overgrown and stuff like that. And again, this was all put on the chassis to be burned. In terms of the divorce, you know, their separation being financially settled, Gary offered Dolores 20,000, but she didn't think that this was fair, so she refused it. Gary started telling his oldest daughter that Dolores didn't care about them, that he would fight in court, you know, to get full custody. And he essentially said that if he didn't get it, that he would do time, like that he would kill her. He'd do time and like essentially thinking like he'd get out after 8 years or something and be able to have the family back and continue life. Then in December, basically, Dolores is just fed up with kind of constantly being on edge because the bungalow she was renting was really like isolated. It was out on its own, and kind of every time there was a road going by, like every time there would be lights or anything, she'd be thinking kind of like, oh, is that Gary? Like, has, you know, is he here? Has he? I don't know if he knew about the place already, but even if he did, it was kind of like, oh, is he here now to start an argument or to do whatever? So she decided to move into a first floor apartment on Main Street in Ballantrae. So obviously as well, then that meant she was kind of, you know, closer to home and closer to sports. The apartment was a lot smaller than the cottage, but, you know, with the help of her dad, Jimmy, she made it a home. Over Christmas, Gary, obviously bitter and annoyed because this was the first Christmas that they were separated, was drinking in Carolyn's bar in Laggy. And like an acquaintance, whatever, Alistair McRae, was there. And so while they were talking, basically like that as he does, Gary then went into a big rant about how his wife was a bitch, she was a whore, all of this. And that he then, like that, said, oh, you know, I'll take things into my own hands, I'll sort it out. And that Alistair said to him, like, will you cop yourself on? And that Gary said back, I'll do time for her. In January then, 2004, Gary phoned Dolores So I believe she may have been already getting a new car and was obviously going to be looking to sell her old car. So Gary, knowing this, offered to buy it off her because he was saying like he could put a bit of work into it then and get more money for it. So he offered her €1,000, and it was said in one of the sources that, you know, she probably would have thought they should get about 700 for it. So she accepted them to give it to him for 1,000. So on the weekend of either the 17th or the 18th of January, Gary went to a local man, Brendan Kern, and told him that he was burning bushes, and he bought 20 quad tyres from him. Again on this weekend, he actually called to the apartment in Ballantrae. Dolores wasn't there and Sharon was minding the other girls, and he said to Sharon, "You should report your mother to the health board for the state she has he's living in." And Sharon would say like that this really hurt her. Sharon would actually also say later on that after they did split up, that he basically said to her kind of like, "I hope you're rot in hell," you know, stuff like this. And that from that day on, she just didn't consider him her dad. On Tuesday then, the 20th of January, and on Tuesday the 20th, he went to E&J Oil and bought two 22-litre like canisters or tanks or whatever of diesel. This was caught on CCTV. He then went to like the local like waste centre or whatever it would be called, and Hilary Rooney processed his bill for his wheelie bin charge. And at this point, Dolores' name was still on the invoice or the bill or whatever, and he said to take it off. It doesn't live here anymore. Like many times before, he had arranged for Laura to go to her grandparents, like his parents, after school. On this evening of the 20th, the Baybush dart team that Dolores was part of were going to the Blue Stack Bar in Donegal for like a tournament. So Dolores' plan was to drive the car down to Gary's, to the family home, you know, get the money off him or whatever, leave the car there, and then that essentially either he might drop her back into town or she would just hitch. So at 6 p.m, her father Jimmy came by with some chairs. Remember I was saying he was helping her like do the place up. So he dropped by with four chairs, kitchen chairs or something, I'm assuming. And they had some tea, and then Dolores left and said goodbye to him and said goodbye to the girls. On this evening at the McRae family home, Martin McGrath called unexpectedly to his friend Gary. Gary went out to him in the drive and talked to him, you know, at his car window. He did not invite him in. Then at 7:25, Dolores arrived in the red 1997 Peugeot 306. Martin, knowing, you know, how tense things were between the couple, the estranged couple, he saw Dolores coming and then said, "I'll leave you to it," and drove off. At around 8:15 p.m, Charlene Walls was driving down the road near the McRae house, and she said that she saw like really high white flames, like hot blue and white flames, but she kind of just thought nothing more and continued on her journey. Around this time, down the road from the McRae house, Joe Walsh came out to get air or something. He was just outside the house, and he said that he just got this foul smell, and when he looked down he could see all this black smoke. So when Dolores didn't meet the rest of the darts team, they just assumed like, oh, like that she was obviously getting her own way to Donegal town. And then when she didn't arrive and the tournament started, they tried calling her and the phone didn't go through, like the call didn't go through. And then they tried texting her and it actually returned back to say unsent. After 9 p.m, Gary McRae then visited his friend Willie Doherty, and they knew each other well. So Gary called in and probably had tea and stuff like that. And he was just talking and he was saying like that he's after buying the car off Dolores, that she was down. He then says like, oh, she seemed very on edge. He says then that a car pulled up, that Dolores got in it and told him to mind the girls, that she was going away for a few days. Willie noted that in all of this talk, there was no like abuse, verbal abuse towards Dolores. There was no name calling, nothing like that. The following morning, Tanya went into her mother's room and she wasn't there. So she went into Sharon's room and said, "Mammy's not here." Sharon knew that no matter what, Dolores would never like not be there in the morning to get the kids ready to bring them to school. Like as I said, Tanya is 7 at this age, Leona is 5, so like they really do, you know, need help. And you could assume like, oh well, the older girls are there to help or whatever, but Sharon said that her mom would never do this. So they tried their mom's phone and again it wasn't going through. They tried texting. So she actually called her aunt Dolores' sister, Carmel. And so like that, she asked her, you know, she was saying that they were worried about the mom. She obviously then tried to get in touch with her as well and couldn't. So her and Sharon actually headed over then in the afternoon to the family home. When they arrived, the red Peugeot was in the drive and Dolores's bag was inside. Her handbag was inside the car. Sharon got like a little worried and said, like, did you just have a row? And he said, no, there was no row. She's probably off having a good time, but I've also seen it basically being saying like she's probably off whoring around. So after this, when they left then, Carmel rang her mum, Kathleen, and Kathleen then rang Ballyshannon Garda Station at 5:25 p.m. and reported Dolores missing. So here, I'll just say that there are kind of variations as to kind of how the next events proceed, but I'm just going to go with the main ones that I came across. So it said that at 6 p.m. Sergeant Tony Killeen called out to the McRae home and that he spoke to Gary and that Gary said she, like that, was picked up by either a silver or a white car, that they headed off in the direction of Bridgetown. But in another source then it says 9 p.m. and it says detectives Tom Connolly and Tony Crinine, but that they're detectives. So the Tonys maybe could be a typo or something, but it's that evening anyway when they call. Now the source that talks about the two detectives basically says like that when he says like, oh, it was a white or silver car, it could have been a Golf. That when after they left, Tom Connolly was basically like, he's a mechanic, like there's no way that he wouldn't know for certain if it was a Golf. So that raised their suspicions. Either way, the following day, they go back to search. Now, it kind of, some sources make it sound like they've already kind of gotten the search to search the land outside and stuff like that, and then another doesn't. So then the next day, Garda Brendan McGonigal, I don't know if it's only him or if there's other people with him, but he calls by. And so some sources say that he called in first for tea and that it's while Gary's making, not that he's calling in for tea, but he's going in to talk. And that while Gary's like offering tea and making it, that he then just goes outside to have a look around. And then the other source kind of makes it sound like the purpose that he actually went with was to go and search around and that Gary happened to just be like, oh, well, sure, I might as well make tea inside. So either way, as Garda Brendan McGonigal is going around the back, you know, around by the sheds and stuff like this, he comes across the chassis and there's like a fire burning. At this stage, it's kind of, you know, it's just still flames and smoke and it's smouldering. So he picks up a stick and kind of moves things around. And it says that he then sees a 6-inch bone that has like a ball at the end of it. And then moving around a bit more, he says what he thinks is a bit of a spinal column. So at this point then, obviously, search warrants are issued. So when they go back then to search the house, it is said that there is no evidence to show that Dolores ever went inside. So inside, they actually find a videotape, and it is of a show recorded called Trail of Guilt. And it's basically about a case over in the UK where a man is murdered, and then they do something to him. I think they dig him, they bury him, they dig him back up, then they like encase him in concrete, they do whatever they do there. Then they decide to take him back out and like hatch away all the cement, and then they decide to burn him. So obviously they use this then as evidence of Gary's intentions. Just to give a bit of context, like the following day at 1:45 p.m, the postman, Joe O'Gorman, says that like he sees what looks like a fireball in the sky with flames and smokes and stuff 40 feet high. So even at that point the next day, the fire was still being, like it was still big, it was still being, essentially he was still putting diesel on it to keep it going, to stoke the flames, is that the right way? To keep the fire going. A local doctor, Dr. Marie Drumgoole, so she would arrive then on scene to basically just confirm that the bone found was a shoulder blade. So obviously the state pathologist, Dr. Marie Cassidy, was brought on scene, and so her and Gardy were actually like on their hands and knees, like going through all this stuff. So I believe they used certain types of fire extinguishers to try get some of the flames down, but they didn't want to like completely like smother the fire with the foam went off from the fire extinguishers because they thought it could destroy evidence. So the fire was still hot when they were picking through it. And it was said that at its hottest point, it would have been 1,000 degrees. That's hotter than a crematorium. So they found bits, like they found parts of a skull, they found teeth, they found bits of a lower jaw, foot bones, a thigh bone. Dr. Marie Cassidy would say she believes that the placement of the bones everywhere would imply that or suggest that Dolores's body could have been dismembered before being put on the fire. Cassidy would also say that because of the temperatures of the fire, no DNA could be obtained from the bones. I did read that they found 2 rings and they were able to identify these as Dolores's. And then also Dr. Paul Keogh, who was the state forensic dental surgeon, said that the teeth that were found were consistent with Dolores's dental records. It was also said that a bone found like as part of the neck was fractured, which would again imply or suggest that force was put on the neck. So, for example, strangulation. The Gardaí brought in forensic anthropologist Laurie Buckley, and essentially 20 trays of different like parts, bones, all this were given to her, and she had to put them back together as what she describes as a jigsaw puzzle. You're putting the life of someone back together. So even though they had all this, they didn't have they didn't really have definitive proof that the body or the bones were Dolores, and they didn't have, they didn't really still have concrete evidence yet. So for the week after, they were trying to, gather different information and evidence. And on the 27th then, so a week after Dolores had gone missing, and then finally on the 30th, they believed they had enough evidence and they went to Gary McRae's parents' house where he was staying and arrested him on suspicion of the murder of his wife. They made a public appeal and basically asked anybody who had information if they did see Dolores around that night, anybody who was travelling down that road, specifically if that, white or silver car could come forward. He was brought to Letterkenny Garda Station. So I think it was like an hour journey to get there, and in the car said nothing. And then he was held for 12 hours and essentially again said nothing. So the DPP was brought in to discuss the evidence to see if they had enough to charge him. And with just 10 minutes to go with his, his detainment time, they charged him with Dolores' murder. That night he was brought to Donegal District Court for a special sitting. By the time he got there, there was an angry crowd of 200 people there, yelling and shouting and, just hurling abuse at him. He was approved bail on condition that he had to stay 3 hours outside of Donegal. So basically he relocated to Cork, he got a job with like a transport company, and essentially just kind of created a new story for himself. So he said he had 2 daughters. So apparently he used to show the pictures of his 2 younger daughters to people. He said that him and his wife were going through some trouble. He worked a lot. It said that he would work like 12-hour shifts for 7 days a week. And then obviously he would need to get time off, and he put it down to that he was going to that mediation or like stuff to do with custody for the kids and the separation and stuff like that. Whereas obviously he was really going to see his solicitors to prepare for the murder trial. And then in September 2005, he said he was going on holiday, and then obviously just didn't go back. It would take 6 months for Dolores' family to get her body back to bury. So on the 16th of July, she had a Catholic burial. So they decided that even though she had converted, she was Catholic, this is what she would have wanted, and they believed that she had obviously only converted for Gary to keep him happy. Gary did not try to apply for special bail conditions to be allowed to attend the funeral. I don't know if I've actually ever heard of anybody do that. If you know of any cases like that, let me know. The trial began on the 17th of October 2005, and the prosecutor, Paul O'Higgins, basically outright told the jury, this is a trial based on circumstantial evidence. And he said, but once you hear all the evidence, you will not have any reasonable doubt that he is guilty. Gardaí believe that Dolores was choked, strangled, pretty soon after she arrived. They believe that, she was probably just only out of the car, and that shortly after this he grabbed her, maybe beat her first, and then strangled her. And then they believe that if the body had been dismembered, that it was dismembered close to the chassis and the fire. Thinking about back to the time where he beat her on New Year's Eve when he, she hadn't even got out of the car and he started punching her. I wonder, could that have happened again? Like that, as she was getting out, he caught her off guard. Again, probably beat her, and then like that, decided to strangle her. Gary himself did not testify. His two eldest daughters did testify about the things they used to say. Laura would say that, again, like that, he did say that he was going to stab her mother, that he was going to rip her guts out. The trial went on for about 3 weeks, and on the 4th of November, the jury of 9 men and 3 women went to deliberate. And the following day, after only 4 hours and 37 minutes of deliberation, he was found guilty by a unanimous verdict. Justice Michael Hanna would hand him the mandatory life sentence. Just before the verdict was read out, it is said that his mum was, crying in the room, that Sharon and Laura were crying silently in the room, and that after the verdict was read out, he was just emotionless. Before being led away, his mother hugged him several times, and then she broke down. On Tuesday, the 22nd of May 2007, the Court of Criminal Appeal rejected an appeal by Gary McRae on the basis that the judge didn't charge the jurors right and about the warrants, but they obviously found that this wasn't valid. Dolores was described as a devoted mother. At the time of her death, she was actually fundraising for an extension for the kids' school. This case has been covered a couple of times, so I believe a 24 Hours to Kill episode was done on it. And then there is Murder My Sweetheart, which was a documentary last year, and Sharon actually talks in it. Sharon basically says that she has no feelings for her dad, that she, like that, as I said, she stopped considering him a dad a long time before that. Sharon would say that one time she spent 5 days in a bare room with just a potty and would be fed her dinners in that room. She said that he would hit them, like the children as well, he would hit them and slap them, and that he would beat them with a belt which was hung up by the mantelpiece. Obviously just as a constant warning to behave. Sharon believes that she was strangled because he said when he did attack their mother that he always went for her throat. Sharon says that once when she was 14, outside the house like that, he started beating her mother, and like that she obviously fell to the ground or whatever. He went inside and he locked her out, and that Sharon then went out and opened the door and got her in, and that she begged her mother to call the guards or to even just for them to leave and go to their grandmother's, and that Dolores couldn't. Sharon says that basically because her father killed her mother and then he went to prison, she was essentially left to raise her younger children, and that she then just had to grow basically immediately. After the guilty verdict outside the court, Sharon actually read a statement on behalf of the family, so I'm just going to read it. She said, "The family and I are relieved that the trial has come to an end and that the jury has returned with a guilty verdict and that justice has been done. You must remember that there are 2 families here that are victims, both the McRaes and the McRae's. My mother was a wonderful mother, daughter and sister and friend to us all, and she will never be forgotten. We want to thank the people of Ballantrae who have been there since Mammy's death." She also thanked the Gardaí for their professional manner in which they handled the investigation. So guys, that is the tragic murder of Dolores McRae, or Dolores McRae. Yeah, hope you're all well. I'm not going to ramble. Surprise, surprise. And yeah, we will just see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.